Sit down, Vera. You're a zero. 200 officers heard my father say it. Watched him point his finger in my face like I was nothing. Like 33 years of my life amounted to nothing at all. He had no idea the Navy SEAL colonel who'd just walked through those doors wasn't there for him. He was there for me, and my name wasn't the general's daughter. My father thought he owned every star in that room, thought he owned me, until the colonel asked one question that made his glass shatter against the floor. Status and identifier, Major. I stood up straighter than I ever had in my life. Ghost 13. His face went from red to white in under 3 seconds. He'd built his entire empire on believing he knew everything. He didn't know his own daughter was the most dangerous asset in the room. This is the story of what happens when the invisible daughter finally speaks. Vera Holloway sat in seat Zulu 14, back row, spine against hard plastic, uniform pressed sharp enough to cut glass, blonde hair pulled into a bun so tight it tugged at her temples like a leash. Small. Make yourself small. That was the trick. She had learned it at 7 years old, perfected it by 14. By 33, it was instinct. Breathe shallow, sit still, disappear into the back row of any room your father is standing in. The briefing room at Fort Averly smelled the way it always smelled. Burnt coffee, industrial wax. The metallic bite of air conditioning turned up too high, like the building itself was trying to freeze out anything human. 200 officers packed into folding chairs under fluorescent light. Down front, under the brightest lights, sat the man who owned the room. Lieutenant General Desmond Holloway, 63 years old, and wearing every one of those years like a medal he'd earned instead of endured. Silver hair cut into a high and tight that defied gravity and common sense both. Skin the color of a man who golfed with senators on Tuesdays. He was laughing, loud, the kind of laugh built to fill a room and remind everyone whose oxygen they were breathing. That's rich, Coughlin. That's rich. He slapped his knee. The officers around him laughed too. Not because it was funny, because he had 3 stars on his shoulder and their careers hung off his mood like ornaments on a tree he could set fire to whenever he wanted. Vera looked at her hands. Steady. They had to be steady. She thought of Marcus Aurelius, the small cracked paperback on her nightstand. The best revenge is to not be like him. She breathed in for 4 counts, held it, let it go for 4 more. Then the room changed. Not a sound. A pressure. Like the air itself had shifted its weight from one foot to the other. The double doors at the back burst open. Not the polite creak of a latecomer. Controlled violence. The chatter died instantly. Even her father's laugh got cut off mid-breath, caught in his throat like a fishbone. A man walked in, didn't walk, stalked. Navy working uniform, digital camouflage looking like a bruise against the sea of Air Force blue. Silver eagle on his collar, trident on his chest. Colonel Sawyer Kane. Vera knew him. Not socially, operationally. Shared a Black Hawk out of a burning valley once, 3 years back. Neither of them saying a word the whole flight, because there was nothing left to say. He was a legend in the community that didn't officially exist. A man who didn't play politics, played for keeps. He ignored 200 heads swiveling toward him. Ignored the protocol clipboard some poor lieutenant was clutching by the door. Walked straight down the center aisle. Boots hitting the carpet in a rhythm that sounded to Vera exactly like a countdown. He stopped 10 feet from the stage. General Holloway, he said. Not loud. Didn't need to be. It carried to the back wall with the kind of clarity that makes a room forget how to breathe. Her father blinked, annoyed at having his spotlight stolen mid-punchline. He adjusted his tie, pulled the benevolent leader mask back over his face like he'd practiced it in a mirror, which he probably had. Colonel Kane, to what do we owe the interruption? We're in the middle of a strategic assessment. Don't have time for assessments, Kane said. Cut him off clean. I've got a developing situation in the Kestrel corridor. I need a Tier 1 asset, immediate deployment. Her father scoffed, leaned back in his chair like a king bored of his own throne. We have pilots here, Colonel. Take your pick. Don't need a pilot. Kane's eyes moved across the room, slow, predatory. I need a ghost. The word landed and didn't move, didn't echo. Just sat there in the recycled air like something radioactive. Specifically, he said, a TSSCI-cleared sniper, deep reconnaissance capability. Silence, the real kind, the kind that has weight. TSSCI, top secret, sensitive compartmented information. That wasn't just high clearance. That was doesn't exist clearance. That was the kind of clearance that meant your own mother couldn't ask what you did for a living and get a real answer. I was told, Kane said, the asset is in this room. Vera's heart slammed once against her ribs, hard, like a fist on a door. Do it. Do it now, before you talk yourself out of it. She didn't look at her father, didn't look at the 200 confused faces around her. She looked at the exit sign, glowing red above Kane's head, and used it like a fixed point on a compass. She stood. The chair scraped the floor. A gunshot in a library. Heads turned. 200 pairs of eyes swung from the stage to the back row like a searchlight finding its target. She came to attention. Shoulders back. Chin level. A statue built out of 33 years of practice standing perfectly, silently still. Kane turned. Slow. His eyes found hers and there was nothing in them. No recognition. Just assessment. A professional's eyes running a threat calculation. He gave one nod. Before he could speak, sit down. Her father's voice, booming, not at Kane anymore, at her. He wasn't looking at the colonel now. He was looking at his daughter, and something in his face had shifted. Fast, ugly, the benevolent mask, cracking to show the man underneath. The man who used to inspect her bedroom with a white glove when she was 10 years old, looking for dust, always finding some. Major Holloway, he barked, condescension dripping off every syllable like grease. Did you not hear me? Sit down, the colonel requested. She started, voice steady despite the tremble working its way up from her knees. Don't care what he requested, her father shouted. He stood too now, needing the height, needing the room to see him towering over his own child. He offered the crowd a tight, apologetic smile, like she'd spilled juice on good carpet. Apologies, gentlemen, he said, tone sliding into something dismissive. Almost fond, my daughter. Gets confused sometimes. Works logistics, supply chains, has a habit of overstating her importance. The room exhaled, tension broken. A ripple of laughter moved through 200 chairs like wind through wheat. Admin, someone whispered near the front. She stood up for a sniper request. That's Rich. Sit down, Lucia. No, wrong name in her head, right name in her ears. Sit down, Vera, her father said, voice dropping low, a frequency only family recognized. You are a zero in this equation. Don't make me ashamed of you. Not here. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. The verse arrived unbidden, the way it always did, some old Sunday school groove worn into her brain that fired whenever her father opened his mouth like that. She stood there. 3 seconds. 3 seconds that stretched out into 3 separate lifetimes. Heat rose in her cheeks. Not shame. Something colder, something with teeth. He didn't just dismiss her, he erased her. To him the uniform was a costume, the rank on her shoulder, a decoration she'd bought at a party store. She sat back down. Her father nodded, satisfied. Dog back in its kennel. He turned to Kane and flashed the winning smile again, the one that had gotten him 3 stars, and a corner office with a view. Now, Colonel, let's find you a real operator. But Vera wasn't looking at the floor. She lifted her head, stared straight at the back of her father's skull like she could put a round through it with sheer will alone. He half turned, caught her eye for exactly 1 second before dismissing her all over again. That look, casual contempt, the look that said you are nothing, the look that said you are just a girl. The air conditioner hummed on, cold, indifferent, and the briefing room dissolved, because the smell of burnt coffee was gone, replaced by roast turkey, wood polish, sage stuffing steaming somewhere close. She wasn't 33 anymore. She was 18, sitting at a mahogany table in a colonial house outside Richmond, and her father was looking at her with those exact same eyes. The house had white pillars, a lawn cut so precisely it looked stitched, not mowed. Inside, a museum built entirely to worship one man. Framed photographs of him shaking hands with senators. Shadow boxes stuffed with medals under glass, like insects pinned for display. An American flag folded into a perfect triangle on the mantel, because even grief had to be arranged correctly in that house. The good china came out, the kind that made the whole family flinch every time a fork touched it. Her mother, Adelaide, had spent 3 days on that meal. Turkey golden, cranberry sauce jellied to a shine, sweet potato casserole steaming at the center of the table like an offering. The air was so cold you could see your breath metaphorically, which was somehow worse than actually. Pass the gravy, her father said, not looking up from his plate. Behind him, on the television in the next room, a football game roared. crowd noise punctuating the silence at the table, like something laughing at them from a safe distance. Vera took a breath. Her hands under the tablecloth were shaking. She'd been holding this in for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. Because surely on a day about family, about gratitude, he would look at her and actually see her. "Dad," she started, voice small. He kept chewing, slicing white meat with the precision of a man performing surgery on a Thanksgiving turkey. "What? I got the letter today." "The Air Force," she said. Couldn't keep the pride out of her voice even though she tried. "I got in. Not just in, Dad. I qualified for the specialized track. My scores put me in the 99th percentile." Her mother froze, gravy boat suspended midair, looked at her husband with wide pleading eyes. "Just this once, please, just this once." He set his fork down. The clink against china rang out like a gavel closing a courtroom. He looked at her, finally, but it wasn't pride on his face. It was confusion, like she'd just announced her intention to run away and join the circus. "Nursing?" he asked. "Logistics. Combat operations," she corrected. Sat up straighter. "I want to fly, maybe intel." He laughed, short, sharp. A bark, not a laugh at all, really. He picked up his wine glass, swirled it, watched the Cabernet climb the sides like he had all the time in the world and she had none. "Vera, honey, let's be realistic. Military's a hard life, not for someone of your disposition. You want to help people? Be a nurse. Find a nice officer in the medical corps. Don't play soldier." Something cracked in her chest. Quiet, structural. "But my scores," she pushed, "were higher than yours were when you enlisted." The temperature in that dining room dropped 10 degrees. "Scores are paper," he snapped. "War is blood. You don't have the stomach for it." He turned away, dismissed her entire future with one flick of his wrist, looked instead at her brother sitting across the table. Nolan, the golden boy. Nolan, who'd dropped out of college 8 months earlier because the pressure was too much, and had spent every day since on the couch with a controller in his hand. "Nolan," her father said, voice suddenly warm, fatherly. "How's the job hunt going, son? No rush, take your time, find yourself. We're proud of you for knowing your limits." Nolan shrugged, stuffed a roll into his mouth. "Thanks, Dad." Vera looked down at her plate. The turkey looked like ash, because that was the math of that house. Nolan quit and got supported. She excelled and got dismissed. The injustice of it sat in her throat like something swallowed wrong. That night, while the house slept, she lay on her bedroom floor and reached under the bed for an old shoebox. This was her secret. Not love letters, not a diary. Ribbons, blue ribbons from the county shooting range. Certificates for high scorer at a summer marksmanship camp she'd attended without ever telling him where she was really going. She ran her thumb over the gold foil lettering, had to hide these. Every time she'd shown him a target sheet with a tight grouping, he'd sneered. "Guns are for men, Vera. A woman holding a rifle looks ridiculous, looks desperate." So she'd learned to hide the one thing she was actually gifted at. Shove the box back into the dark. Let it gather dust with whatever else lived under that bed. She went down for water, found her mother in the kitchen, scrubbing a roasting pan, hands red and raw from water too hot to be comfortable. "Mom," she whispered, "why does he do that? Why does he hate that I want to serve?" Adelaide didn't turn around, kept scrubbing. Steel wool rasping against metal like it was the only sound she trusted to fill the silence. "He doesn't hate it, Vera. He worries. He's from a different time. He thinks he's protecting you." "He's not protecting me," Vera said, voice trembling now, no point hiding it. "He's erasing me." Her mother turned off the water, dried her hands on a dish towel, walked over and touched her daughter's cheek, warm hand, empty eyes. "Don't cause a scene, honey. Please, for me, just let him be the general. It's easier that way." The complicity of silence, love that folded itself smaller and smaller until it fit inside someone else's comfort. That pattern didn't stay in that house. It followed her into the uniform. Followed her for 15 years, 3 years after that Thanksgiving. Advanced tactical training. A ridge somewhere dry and unforgiving. She took a bad fall during a night rappel and tore a shoulder and cracked 2 ribs on the way down. 3 days in the base hospital. She didn't call him. Knew better by then. Her mother did though, and Vera waited. For a call. A card. Even a form letter with his signature stamped by some aide who'd never met her. Nothing came. 4th day, packing to leave. Phone buzzed on the tray table. A text from Dad. Her heart jumped anyway. 21 years old, a commissioned officer, and still some desperate child inside her, leaning toward a crumb like it was a meal. She opened it. Your mother told me you got hurt. Told you it wasn't a playground. You've made your point. Resign your commission and come home. The Ashford boy is a lawyer now. Single. Time to get married and stop this nonsense. She stared at the screen until the backlight died. Left her sitting there in the dark of that hospital room. He didn't ask if she was in pain. He saw her broken body as proof he'd been right all along. Saw it as leverage to drag her back to the kitchen. She deleted the message. That night the sadness became something else. Something colder. A hard, flat stone settling into the pit of her stomach and staying there. She asked herself a question in that hospital room that would follow her for the next decade. Why am I still trying to prove myself to a man determined to stay blind? Because if he wouldn't see her standing in the light, then maybe she needed to go somewhere he could never look. Somewhere darker. Somewhere harder. Somewhere his opinion couldn't follow. She wasn't going to be a nurse. Wasn't going to be a lawyer's wife. She was going to become the one thing he feared most. A weapon he couldn't control. If you want to know what hell looks like, it isn't fire. It's a drainage ditch in Georgia, 3 a.m, 40-degree mud working its way into every pore she owned. 22 years old, lying prone in a ghillie suit that weighed 20 pounds dry and 50 pounds soaked. Hadn't moved in 14 hours, every joint screaming quietly, the way pain gets when it's been going on so long it forgets how to be loud. An ant crawled across her eyelid. She didn't blink. Couldn't. A blink might catch the light wrong. Might give her position away to the spotters scanning the tree line with optics that could count the hairs on her arm. This was sniper school. 60% washout rate. For women close to impossible. Not because they couldn't shoot women. Statistically, made better shooters. Lower center of gravity. More patience. But because of everything else. The grit. The waiting. The indignity built into every hour. Her bladder was screaming. In the life her father wanted for her, there'd be a tiled bathroom somewhere with potpourri on the counter. Here there was mud and no timeout. Callous your mind, she thought. Borrowed the phrase from a book she'd listened to on repeat during every ruck march. When you think you're done, you're only at 40%. She didn't move, just let go. Warmth, then cold. Urine mixing with mud, freezing against her skin inside the suit. Degrading, necessary. She lay there another 18 hours. When the instructors finally walked past her position, missing her by inches, she didn't feel shame. She felt power. She'd done what the golden boys in her cohort couldn't do. Erased herself completely, and in that erasure survived. 6 months later, the mud of Georgia became the dust of a valley her father would never hear the real name of. Overwatch for a joint element clearing a village suspected of harboring couriers. Her first real assignment. Real weight behind every calculation now. Perched on a ridge 800 yards out, looking through glass that made the whole world narrow down to one small circle of clarity. Her hands trembled, just slightly. Guns are for men, her father's voice said, somewhere in the back of her skull, where it always lived, rent-free. You don't have the stomach for it. The trembling stopped. Comms crackled, taking fire. 3 o'clock elevated. A fighter popped from behind a rock wall, RPG shouldered, aimed at the lead vehicle in the convoy below. Windage. Elevation. Breath in, breath out, pause at the bottom. Squeeze. The recoil kicked her shoulder. A heartbeat later the man dropped. The launcher clattered uselessly against the stone. Good effect on target, her spotter murmured. Clean kill. She didn't feel sick. Didn't feel proud exactly either. Felt something quieter. Competence maybe. The specific cold satisfaction of a job done exactly right. She was good at this. Exceptional, actually. 2 tours, a kill count that would have made half her father's staff officers go pale if they'd ever seen the number. Came home with sand still in her boot treads, and a Valor Cross folded into a duffel bag she never unpacked in front of anyone. Went home to Virginia on leave. Summer. Cicadas buzzing. Her parents hosting a garden party. Lawn immaculate. Wine chilled. The whole DC ecosystem of lobbyists and contractors and officers angling for their next star drifting across the grass in linen and pearls. She wore a sundress that covered the bruises still healing on her shoulder from the rifle stock. Felt like an alien at her own family's party. A woman approached, wife of a sitting senator. Chardonnay in one hand, opinions in the other. Vera, darling, we haven't seen you in ages. Your father said you've been away. Where were you? She opened her mouth, wanted to say I was in a valley providing overwatch for an airborne element. Haven't slept in a real bed in 7 months. Before a single word came out, she was in Europe, her father said. Loud bright, backpacking, you know how it is these days. Finding herself in hostels. France, Italy. She froze. The senator's wife laughed. Oh, how wonderful. Paris in the spring is to die. For Vera looked at her father. He wasn't looking back, already scanning the crowd for someone more important. He had lied, turned her service into a vacation, turned her blood into a postcard, because a daughter who killed men in defense of others didn't fit the narrative of the general's sweet, uncomplicated family. Too messy, too masculine, threatened his spotlight in a way he could never forgive. She stood there, surrounded by wealth and power, and understood, with total clarity, that she was invisible. She didn't correct him, didn't make a scene, took a sip of iced tea, and let the lie settle over her like a shroud that fit her exactly her size. That was the moment the daughter died, and something else started breathing in her place. Back at her unit, people started noticing. She didn't linger at the officers' club, didn't tell war stories. Did the job, filed the report, vanished. Where's Holloway? Her commanding officer asked once after a briefing. Gone, sir, said a lieutenant commander, who would one day carry a colonel's eagle, looking at the empty chair where she'd been sitting seconds before. She's like a ghost. You don't see her until she wants you to. And she's gone before you can thank her. Ghost, the name stuck. Later, when her clearance climbed into territory that didn't have a name on any org chart, she picked her own call sign. Ghost 13. 13, because it was supposed to be bad luck. Her father's bad luck, specifically, because he thought he'd buried her under his lies, thought he'd shamed her into permanent silence. He never understood that by trying to erase her, he'd made her invisible in exactly the way a sniper needs to be invisible. He'd trained his own weapon without ever knowing he was doing it. The bar wasn't the kind of place anyone found on a map app. A service road 3 miles off base. No windows. Floor perpetually sticky with spilled domestic beer. Air thick with hops and lemon disinfectant and the particular sweat smell of people who trusted each other completely. To a civilian, it might have looked like a hole in the wall. To them, it was a cathedral. Friday night, jukebox in the corner working through some old country ballad, guitar competing against the clack of pool balls, and a booth full of laughter somewhere behind her. Vera sat at a scratched table near the back. Jeans, gray t-shirt, hair down for maybe the 3rd time that month. A bottle of something cheap sweating in her hand, her team around her, her real family if she was honest about it, which she rarely allowed herself to be. Duke, a heavy weapons specialist, out of Houston, who could strip a machine gun blindfolded in under 30 seconds. Priest, their comms guy, who looked like a high school accountant and had a purple heart from dragging a wounded man out of a burning vehicle under fire, and the memory of the man who'd first put them all in the same room. She stared at the condensation running down her bottle and drifted back 6 months. A briefing tent somewhere the maps didn't officially acknowledge. First time she'd worked directly under Colonel Sawyer Kane. Hostage rescue. High stakes. Pinned in a valley, taking fire from 3 directions, extraction bird unable to land, running low on everything that mattered. She'd found a perch. A jagged shelf of rock 500 yards up. Stayed there 12 hours baking, recalculating wind that kept changing its mind through the canyon like it was toying with her. 9 shots, 9 targets down, every one a threat about to flank Kane's element. Back at base, covered in dust, adrenaline still running hot in her blood, she'd expected the usual. Silent nod, maybe. SEALs peeling off toward their own debrief, the Air Force support forgotten by dinner. Instead, Kane walked straight up to her in the mess hall, grime on his face, no smile. Holloway, he'd said, voice like gravel dragged over sandpaper. Sir, sit down, he ordered, but not like her father ordered things. This was respect wearing the shape of a command. He leaned in, voice low enough that it stayed between them. That shot on the RPG gunner, 11 o'clock. Windage was tricky, sir, she'd said. You saved my point man's life, Holloway. He clapped a hand on her shoulder. Heavy, not possessive. An affirmation, plain and simple. You're a weapon, a damn fine one. That single sentence outweighed every medal her father had ever displayed under glass. Because Kane hadn't seen a woman that day, Hadn't seen a general's daughter. He'd seen a warrior. Full stop, no qualifiers attached. A hand waved in front of her face now, back in the bar, snapping her out of the memory. Earth to ghost, Duke said, grinning, sliding a fresh beer across the table. You doing the 1,000-yard again? Drink, tabs on me tonight. She smiled. A real one, thanks, Duke. Hey, said a raspy voice at her elbow. Thompson, Master Sergeant Bree Thompson, 50 years old, tough as boot leather, gray streaking through dark hair, a look in her eyes that had watched 100 commanders come and go and hadn't been impressed by most of them, nearing retirement. The unofficial den mother of the whole unit. If den mothers drank whiskey neat and smoked like it was still 1,985. She took a sip, studied Vera with an intelligence that made most people uncomfortable. Heard about the promotion board today, she said. Vera stiffened. Didn't make the cut for command track again. Let me guess, Thompson said. Daddy Dearest had a hand in that. Vera shrugged, traced a thumbnail down the condensation on the bottle. He says I'm not ready. Says I need more admin time. Says the fields made me rough around the edges. Thompson scoffed, blew a plume of imaginary smoke through her nose. She's an old guard officer, Thompson said, leaning in. He made his rank shaking hands and playing golf. You make yours in the dirt. You've got respect, real respect. The kind he can't buy with a country club membership. Don't let that man's shadow block your sun, kid. He's terrified you're going to outshine him. The words landed like a hand on the back of the neck. Vera frowned. What do you mean? He's jealous, Thompson said. Flat, certain. The idea was almost too big to hold. Her father, the great General Holloway, jealous of her. Yet she looked around the table. Duke, priest, laughing at something, treating her like an equal, like a vital moving part of something that actually worked. And she thought, maybe Thompson wasn't wrong. Her phone buzzed against the table, violent, insistent. Dad. The laughter at the table seemed to fade a half step. The warmth of the room went thin. She reached for the phone, stomach tightening into a fist. Be home by 800 tomorrow. The text read. Mom's stressed about the senator's barbecue. Cleaning crew missed the downstairs bathroom. Patio furniture needs scrubbing. Wear something nice. No camo. She stared at the words. Scrubbing patio furniture. She was a Tier 1 asset, the all-seeing eye. Hands that had saved teams of Navy SEALs from death, now being summoned to wipe down chairs because her father wanted to impress a man in a suit. The irony had a taste, something sharp and coppery like blood. Duke caught the shift in her face. Bad news, recall order? She looked at him, looked at this small, ragged family that would take a bullet for her without a second's hesitation. Looked back at the phone. No, she said. Quiet. Just a reminder of my place. She drained her beer in one long pull, bitterness matching the thing sitting in her chest. I have to go, she said, standing. Got duty tomorrow, duty, priest said. It's Saturday, yeah. She grabbed her keys. Janitorial duty. She walked out into the humid Florida night. Music still playing behind her. Ahead of her, the mansion, the barbecue. The man determined to turn a wolf into a golden retriever, no matter how many times it bit him. Thompson's words followed her the whole drive home. He's terrified you're going to outshine him. Maybe it was time to stop cleaning the furniture. Maybe it was time to flip the table. 7 days before the briefing room. 7 days before the world would learn the 2 words, Ghost 13. The officers' club at a different base entirely. The annual gala. Air thick with cologne and prime rib, and the desperate sweat of colonels trying to make general before their knees gave out. Lighting dim. A quartet somewhere working through a soft, forgettable version of an old standard. Crystal clinking like something fragile, trying to survive the night. Vera arrived at 1900 sharp. Spent an hour in front of a mirror getting it right. No cocktail dress. No pearls. Service dress blues. Immaculate. Silver oak leaves of a major gleaming on each shoulder. A ribbon rack that told a story. Even with the most sensitive rose deliberately left off 3 lines of commendation, representing blood and sand and sleepless months. She felt proud. First time in longer than she wanted to admit. She spotted her father across the room, holding court near the bar. A senator on one side, 2 defense contractors on the other. Tuxedo tailored within an inch of its life. Scotch in one hand, cigar in the other. The picture of a distinguished statesman, if statesmen were also bullies, who inspected their children's bedrooms with white gloves. She walked over, shoulders back. Good evening, General. He turned. The smile aimed at the senator died the instant his eyes landed on her. He looked her up and down, lip curling. Vera, he said. Voice dropped so the others wouldn't hear. What are you wearing? It's a military gala, Dad. This is the appropriate uniform. You look like a chauffeur, he hissed. I told your mother to get you that blue dress. The one that actually shows you have a figure. He shook his head. God, you make it so hard to help you. Senator Ashford brought his son tonight. Investment banker. I wanted to introduce you. How am I supposed to sell him on this? He gestured at her uniform, at the ribbons on her chest, like they were a stain that needed retreating. Her stomach twisted. I'm not here to find a husband, General, she said stiffly. I'm here to represent my unit. Before he could answer, a young lieutenant approached. Evans, a kid from her intel team. He saw her and snapped to attention instantly, instinctively. Good evening, Major Holloway, he said, genuine respect in his voice. He didn't see a woman in a costume. He saw his superior officer. Her father's eyes narrowed, hated it, hated seeing anyone respect her without his permission stamped on it first. At ease, Lieutenant, he interrupted, stepped between them, placed a hand on Vera's shoulder. Heavy, patronizing. Vera isn't on duty tonight, son, he told Evans, smiling with all his teeth. She's just here as my daughter. He turned to her, grip tightening. Sweetheart, the senator's glass is empty. Run get him a refill. Gin and tonic, extra lime. And a scotch for me while you're up. The air left her lungs. Evans looked between them, confused. Knew something was wrong, even if he couldn't name it. You didn't ask a field-grade officer to fetch drinks like she was catering staff. Dad, she whispered, face burning. There are servers for that. I asked you to do it, he said, voice climbing just enough for the circle around them to hear. Go on. Make yourself useful. Don't just stand there looking stiff. The senator chuckled, oblivious. A gin and tonic would be lovely, dear. She stood there for one long heartbeat, watched Evans stare at the floor, embarrassed on her behalf, felt every set of eyes in that circle strip away her rank, her sacrifices, her decade of blood in about the time it took to blink. To him she was the help. She swallowed something bitter enough to burn. Yes, sir. She walked to the bar, legs heavy, a walk of shame in dress blues. The bartender's sympathetic look made it exactly 10 times worse. She carried the drinks back, handed the senator his gin, handed her father his scotch. Good girl, he said, patted her cheek. See, wasn't so hard. She turned to leave. Needed air, needed to scream into a pillow somewhere far from this room. Her father grabbed her elbow, not fatherly this time, painful. He steered her toward a quiet alcove near the kitchen entrance, leaned close, scotch heavy on his breath. The mask was gone now. I saw that look in your eye, he said. Low growl. Don't you ever embarrass me like that again? Don't you ever hesitate when I give you an order? She pulled her arm free. You humiliated me in front of my subordinate. Humiliated you? He laughed. Dry, cruel. You have no status unless I give it to you. Those medals don't mean anything. That rank doesn't mean anything. I made calls to get you into the academy. I made calls to keep your record clean. You are my creation, Vera. He leaned closer, face inches from hers, and I can break what I made. 1 phone call. So know your place. You're my daughter first, an officer second, and only when I say so. He straightened his jacket, smoothed his tie. The mask clicked back into place like a door closing. Now go fix your face. You look emotional. It's unbecoming. He walked back to the party, left her alone in the shadows by the kitchen. She drove home in silence. No radio, no tears. Those wouldn't come. Not anymore. She was past the place where tears lived. She walked into her apartment. Bathroom, harsh vanity lights. Looked at herself. The blue uniform. The faint marks on her arm where his fingers had dug in. She understood something, clean and cold, standing there. He didn't just want to control her. He wanted to own her. And as long as she kept seeking his approval, as long as she played by his rules, she would always be his property. She unbuttoned her collar, hung the jacket carefully, because old habits don't die just because you finally see them clearly. I made you. I can break you. She repeated it to the empty room. Then, quiet, to her own reflection. No, Dad, you didn't make me. The Air Force made me. The war made me. The pain made me. And you can't break a ghost. Next week was the strategic briefing. He'd be there. She'd be there. She washed her face in cold water. When she looked up, the scared girl who used to hide ribbons under her bed was gone. Something else looked back at her instead. Next time, She promised the mirror, "I won't fetch the drinks. Next time I bring the storm. Sit down, Vera. You're a zero. Don't embarrass me." Her father's voice was still ringing off the acoustic tiles of the briefing room, the laughter of 200 sycophants still rippling through the air like something that hadn't finished dying yet. This was the moment she'd feared her whole life. Public humiliation. Her dignity stripped in front of everyone she served with. But something strange happened instead. She didn't shrink, didn't crumble, didn't stare at her shoes and apologize and scurry back into invisibility the way he wanted. She felt calm. The specific calm that arrives right before you squeeze a trigger. The room slowed down. Server rack hum, rustling papers, snickering officers. All of it faded into a dull background buzz, like the world turning its volume down to let one single thing come through clearly. She kept standing. Posture perfect. Chin level. She didn't look at her father. She looked through him, straight at the Navy SEAL colonel standing 10 feet away. Kane hadn't laughed, hadn't moved. He was watching her with an intensity that burned hotter than the fluorescent lights overhead. "Major," her father barked, face flushing a dangerous shade of purple. He stepped toward her, hand half raised, the way a man raises a hand at a disobedient dog. "I gave you a direct order. Sit down before I have the MPs remove you for insubordination." The room went dead silent, threatening a field officer with military police in a room full of witnesses over a seating request. Even for General Holloway, that was a line most people didn't cross out loud. The air went thick, charged, the kind of static that makes the hair on your arms stand up before a storm actually breaks. Kane moved, not toward her father, between them, turned his back on a 3-star general, a breach of protocol so blatant it pulled an audible gasp from the front row. He looked straight at her. "Major Holloway, Colonel," she answered, steady, not a flicker of the adrenaline flooding her system. "I asked for a specific asset," Kane said. "Low, dangerous. I was told that asset was in this room. Are you claiming that identity?" Her father sputtered behind him. "Colonel, I don't know what game you're playing, but my daughter is a logistics officer. She orders paper clips and schedules fuel trucks. She is not silence." Kane's voice cracked like a whip. Her father froze mid-sentence, mouth still open. Nobody told General Desmond Holloway to be silent. Not in his own base. Not in his own kingdom. Kane didn't even turn around. "I'm asking you a question, Major," he said. Status and identifier. This was it, the point of no return. She let go of the daughter who scrubbed patio furniture. Let go of the girl who buried ribbons in a shoebox under a bed she hadn't slept in for 15 years. "Ghost 13, she said. The name hung there. Didn't echo. Just sat in the air like something too heavy to fall. "Sector?" Kane asked. "Kestrel Corridor," she answered. "Overwatch, Team 6 Element." Kane nodded once, face unreadable. "Clearance level." She paused, a fraction of a second, long enough to look at her father, who stood blinking, mouth still open. A man watching his own understanding of the world come apart in real time. "Umbra 0, she said. "Clear and even. Special access." The reaction was immediate, catastrophic. Her father's hand holding a glass of water began to shake. Water sloshed over the rim onto his polished shoes. "Umbra 0. He knew what that meant. Every officer in that room knew what that meant. He was a 3-star general. He carried top-secret clearance and thought that made him God in every room he entered. Umbra 0 was the stratosphere. Need to know so restrictive that generals didn't get read in unless the mission specifically required it. It meant she answered to people who existed outside any org chart he'd ever seen. It meant she knew things that could end his career with a single whispered sentence. That's impossible," he stammered, voice losing its boom entirely. He looked around, desperate for an ally. "She's lying. She's confused. She works in supply." He turned to his chief of staff, a colonel named Rourke. "Tell him, Rourke. Tell him she's just a paper pusher." But Rourke wasn't looking at the general anymore. He was looking at Vera. And for the first time in over a decade, he wasn't looking at her with pity. He was looking at her with something closer to awe. "Sir," Rourke said, quiet. "If she knows the Kestrel designator, we don't have access to those files. That's black tier operational." Her father turned back to her, eyes wide, searching for the daughter he thought he owned. She wasn't there anymore. "Vera," he whispered. You never told me." "You never asked," she said. "You were too busy telling everyone I was backpacking through Europe." A murmur moved through the room. 200 officers whispering at once, the sound rising like water, finding new cracks. Did you hear that? Ghost 13. The general didn't know. How does a man not know his own daughter is a Tier 1 operator? He had her fetching drinks. The realization hit them like a shockwave, rolling outward from the center of the room. The man they feared, the man who projected total omniscient control, was a fool in his own house. The emperor standing there in his stars with absolutely no clothes on at all. Kane checked his watch. Done with the drama. He had what he came for. Birds spinning on the tarmac, he said to her. Wheels up in 10. Gears in my car, she answered. Already good to go, get it, Kane ordered. Extraction teams holding in the corridor. I need eyes on ground by 0600. Yes, sir. She stepped out of the row, walked past the officers who'd snickered at her 7 minutes earlier. They pulled their legs in to let her pass. A few even rose, instinctive, the body responding to rank before the mind caught up. She reached the center aisle. Her father blocked her path. He looked smaller now, shoulders slumped. The confidence that usually radiated off him like heat had simply evaporated, leaving behind a confused, aging man in a suit that suddenly looked 2 sizes too big. He reached out, fingers hovering, like he might grab her arm and drag her back into the shape he'd built for her. Vera, wait, we need to discuss this. You can't just, I forbid it. She didn't flinch, didn't pull away, just stopped and looked at him. Really looked, the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes. The fear hiding underneath the bluster like something small and cold that had been there the whole time. Camouflaged by volume. For years she'd wanted to scream at him, wanted to list every insult, every dismissal, every time he'd made her feel like furniture in her own life. She thought this moment would taste like vengeance. It didn't. It tasted like pity. He'd spent his whole life building a shrine to himself, chasing rank and status, convinced power lived in the stars on a shoulder. And in all that chasing, he'd missed the actual greatness standing 3 feet away from him at every Thanksgiving table for 33 years. He'd missed her completely. You don't have the clearance to discuss this, General, she said. Soft, the words a blade, delivered with the gentleness of someone closing a door quietly, instead of slamming it. Vera, his voice cracked. Goodbye, Dad. She walked past him, toward the double doors, where Kane stood waiting. Florida sunlight pouring in behind him, bright and white and blinding after an hour under fluorescent tubes. As she crossed the threshold, she heard a glass shatter against the floor behind her. Behind her, she didn't turn around. She walked out of the air-conditioned nightmare and into the heat. Jet fuel and freedom, thick in the same breath. Somewhere across the tarmac, rotor blades were already turning, cutting the humid air, waiting to carry her toward a war where the bullets were honest, and the enemies didn't pretend to love her first. She was done fighting for his approval. Now she was fighting for her life. And, for the first time in longer than she could remember, she liked her odds. The rotors were already screaming when Vera Holloway crossed the tarmac, and the noise did something for her chest that no words ever had, because words lied. Rotors didn't. Rotors just spun, violent and honest, promising nothing except forward motion. She climbed in, strapped down. Behind her, Fort Averly shrank into a smear of runway lights and regret that wasn't hers to carry anymore. Colonel Sawyer Kane sat across from her, helmet already on, face lit green by the instrument panel. He didn't ask if she was all right, didn't ask about the shattered glass behind her, the father frozen in a hallway, the 200 officers who would spend the next month whispering her name like a rumor they couldn't quite believe. He just handed her a folder, sealed, heavy. Mission packet, he said. Read it in the air. She opened it. Kestrel Corridor. A cluster of mud brick compounds pressed into a valley that didn't officially have a name on any map issued to the public. 2 aid workers taken 11 days ago. A journalist with them, American passport, family back in Ohio, probably watching the news right now and hoping. Hostiles embedded deep, using the terrain the way a spider uses a web patient, layered, built to catch anything that came looking. Her eyes moved down the page. Elevation charts, wind patterns, a grainy satellite still of a minaret that would, in about 18 hours, become the most important 8 inches of concrete in her entire life. You'll have Overwatch, Kane said. Team goes in on foot. You stay high. You stay quiet. I always do, she said. He almost smiled. Almost good, he said, because this valley doesn't forgive loud. The safe house sat 2 clicks from the extraction point, a squat concrete building the team had been using for 3 days before Vera's boots ever touched the ground. Inside it smelled like diesel and stale coffee, and the particular mildew that lived in every forward operating structure ever built by people in a hurry. She dropped her gear in the corner, met the rest of the element in under 4 minutes, because introductions in this line of work happened fast, or they didn't happen at all. Duke was already there, grinning like they hadn't just crossed half a continent to end up in the same room again. Beside him, a new face, young, wiry, jaw tight, with the specific nervous energy of someone on their first real deployment, with people who'd stopped being nervous a long time ago. Rossi, Duke said. Comms and demo. Green. But he's fast. Rossi nodded at her like she was something out of a training video he'd watched too many times to believe was standing in front of him now. Ghost 13, he said. Heard the stories. Don't believe half of them, she said. Which half should I believe? She almost smiled. The half where I hit what I aim at. Kane walked the room through the plan twice. Once fast for the shape of it. Once slow for the seams. The places where a single miscalculation could turn a rescue into a funeral. He used a laser pointer on a laminated map, taped crooked to a plywood wall, and every red dot he traced felt to Vera like a heartbeat she'd have to keep count of once the shooting started. Questions, he said when he finished. Silence. The good kind. The kind that meant everyone in the room trusted the plan enough to stop poking holes in it. Then get some sleep, Kane said, because tomorrow this valley is going to try very hard to kill all of us, and I'd like everyone rested when it does. Nobody laughed. Nobody needed to. She didn't sleep, not really. Lay on a cot with her eyes closed and her mind doing the math it always did the night before a mission wind. Elevation, the slow creeping arithmetic of a bullet's flight time across distances that would make most people's stomachs drop just hearing the numbers out loud. Somewhere around 3 in the morning her satellite phone buzzed. Not the personal one. That one was dead, powered off, sitting in a locker back at Averly where it belonged. This was the secure line. Command traffic only. She almost ignored it, except the screen said priority, and priority meant someone back home had already found a way to complicate her life before she'd even fired a shot. She stepped outside. Cold desert air, stars in numbers that made the whole sky look like static. Holloway, she answered, Major. The voice on the other end belonged to Lieutenant Colonel O.C., the base's senior legal officer, a man she'd exchanged maybe 6 sentences with in 3 years of service together. His voice had none of its usual dry courtroom calm. I need you to know something's happening back here, he said, before you hear it secondhand and it throws you off your game out there. Her stomach tightened. Go ahead. Your father called me this morning, O.C. said. Demanded your personnel file. Full jacket, unredacted, on his desk within the hour. She closed her eyes. Of course he did. I told him I couldn't do that, O.C. continued. Told him you're assigned to a special access program under joint jurisdiction. Told him your clearance level exceeds his own by 2 full tiers. And how'd he take that? Not well. A pause on the line. She could hear him choosing his next words the way a man chooses which wire to cut. He threatened me, Osei said. Career, rank. Said he'd have me scrubbing latrines in Alaska if I didn't cooperate. Vera's jaw tightened and I recorded the call, Osei said. Because that's protocol for any conversation involving classified personnel matters. And because, frankly, Major, I had a feeling I might need it. She stood there in the cold, phone pressed to her ear, watching her own breath fog in front of her like something trying to escape her chest. He's not going to stop, she said. Quiet. Not a question. No, Osei agreed. He's not. Then let him choke on it, she said. She hung up, stood there another minute, letting the desert cold do something the anger in her chest couldn't. Slow it down. Steady it out. Because tomorrow wasn't about her father. Tomorrow was about 2 people in a mudroom, somewhere in that valley, praying for a window that only she could open. Everything else could wait. The climb started at 400. 2 hours of switchbacks over loose rock, every foothold a small negotiation between speed and silence. By the time she reached her perch, a jagged shelf 1,100 yards out, angled just right to see the minaret and the compound clustered beneath it like something crouching. The sky had gone the color of a fresh bruise, purple bleeding slowly into gray. She settled in, built her hide the way she'd built 100 hides before. Rock, brush, patience. Comms crackled soft in her ear. Ghost, you in position? Kane's voice, low, almost a whisper even through the encrypted channel. In position, she answered. Glass is clean, copy, elements moving in 10. She watched the compound wake up. A dog barked somewhere. No, not a dog. A goat tethered near a well, bleating at nothing in particular. A woman crossed a courtyard with a basket balanced on her hip. Smoke started curling from a cook fire 2 buildings over. Ordinary life laid out beneath the crosshairs of extraordinary violence about to happen. She hated this part, the waiting, the watching people move through their morning with no idea their whole world was about to detonate. Movement, she murmured. North wall, 2 hostiles, rifles slung. Copy, Kane said. Stand by. The team moved in from the east, using a dry creek bed for cover, exactly the way the plan called for. Vera tracked them through her scope for exactly 4 seconds before something in her peripheral vision made her stomach drop. Because the 2 hostiles on the north wall weren't looking north. They were looking east, directly at the creek bed. Kane, she said. Sharp. They're not on patrol. They're waiting. What? They knew you were coming from that side, she said. Someone told them. Silence on the line. A half-second that stretched out like a held breath. Then the world exploded. Gunfire erupted from 3 directions at once. Not the disorganized panic of a surprised guard force, but the tight, coordinated volley of people who'd rehearsed exactly this ambush. Kane's team dropped into the creek bed, pinned, muzzle flashes, chewing up the dirt around them in a rhythm too precise to be luck. Taking heavy fire, Kane's voice, tight, now. All the calm burned out of it. We are pinned, Ghost. We need that window. She was already moving her scope, fast, methodical, because panic killed people, and she'd trained the panic out of herself a long time ago in a Georgia drainage ditch that had taught her exactly what stillness cost and exactly what it bought. Minaret, she said. Elevated shooter. Sector 4. She found him, a man with a rifle steady on a bipod, sweeping fire down into the creek bed, with the patience of someone who knew, with total certainty, that his targets weren't going anywhere. Distance 1,200 yards, she called. Wind full value, left to right, 10 miles an hour. Send it when ready, Kane barked, voice nearly swallowed by gunfire on his end. She breathed in, held, adjusted. The whole world narrowed down to 1 small circle of glass and 1 small window of time. Exhaled halfway, paused, squeezed. The recoil hit her shoulder like something personal. A second and a half later, the shooter in the minaret jerked backward and folded, rifle clattering down through the stone archway behind him. Target down, she said. Windows open, moving, Kane answered. She watched through the scope as the team broke from the creek bed in a controlled sprint, using the sudden gap in fire to close the distance to the compound's outer wall. She caught 2 more targets before they made entry, 1 on a rooftop, 1 ducking behind a low wall she put a round straight through. And still something in her chest wouldn't unclench. Because ambushes didn't happen by accident in terrain, this specific. Somebody had known exactly which creek bed Kane's team would use, which meant somebody had known the plan before it ever left that concrete safe house, which meant there was a leak, and leaks, in her experience, never stayed small. 20 minutes later, Kane's voice came back on the line, breathless but steady. Package secure, he said. Both hostages alive. Copy, she breathed. Relief hitting her all at once, sharp and physical. The way it always did after the adrenaline had nowhere left to go. Good work. She held her position another 10 minutes, sweeping the compound for any last movement before finally breaking down her hide and starting the long climb back down. Her legs shook the whole way. Not from fear, from the specific exhaustion of a body that had spent 3 hours perfectly, unnaturally still. Back at the safe house, the team was already gathering gear, faces streaked with dust and the particular tightness that follows a mission that almost went wrong. Rossi sat on a crate, hands trembling slightly as he packed his comms kit. Vera crouched beside him. First real one, she said. Not a question. He nodded. Didn't trust his voice yet. It gets quieter, she said. Not easier, quieter. He looked at her like that was the first true thing anyone had told him all week. Kane found her 20 minutes later, standing outside, watching the sun climb fully over the ridgeline she'd spent the morning perched on. Someone talked, she said before he could open his mouth. He didn't argue. I know, he said. Who had the route? Command staff, he said. 4 people back at Averly, plus whoever they briefed above their pay grade. She looked at him. That's not a short list, she said. No, he agreed. It's not. But it's a start. 2 days later, back at Fort Averly, the base felt different, in a way Vera couldn't have described to anyone who hadn't lived through it. Something in the air had shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the way weather shifts before a storm nobody's quite ready to name yet, because word had spread fast, the way it always did in a place built on rank and rumor in equal measure. She walked into the office's dining facility for the first time in a week and felt 200 conversations pause, just slightly, just long enough to notice. Not fear, exactly. Something closer to recalibration. People realizing they'd need to update the file they kept in their heads labeled General Holloway's daughter, Elena Crossnow. Bree Thompson caught up with her near the coffee station, tray balanced on one hip like a weapon she knew how to carry. You're famous, Thompson said. Flat. I'd rather not be, Vera said. Too late, sweetheart. Half this base thinks you walked on water at that briefing. The other half thinks your daddy's about to have a stroke. Vera almost smiled. Which half are you? Thompson snorted. Neither, she said. I think you did what you should have done 10 years ago. Everything else is just noise catching up to reality. They sat. Thompson lowered her voice, leaning in the way she did when something mattered. You heard about the officers' club, she said. No, your father walked in yesterday. Full dress. Trying to project business as usual. And room didn't hush, Thompson said. That's the thing. Usually when he walks in, whole place goes quiet, like the Red Sea parting for God himself. Yesterday nobody looked up, nobody said a word. He sat down alone at his usual table and ate a club sandwich by himself like some retiree nobody remembers the name of. Vera stared at her coffee, felt something complicated move through her chest. Not triumph, not quite. Something closer to grief for a version of her father that had never actually existed outside her own hope. She pushed the feeling down. There wasn't room for it right now, because that afternoon, a message came through her secure line that put everything else on hold. Briefing room, Kane's text read, 1400. Bring your notebook. The briefing room this time was small. 6 people, not 200. No fluorescent hum of an auditorium, no rows of folding chairs built to hold an audience. Just a table, a laptop, and the particular quiet of people who already suspected the news wasn't going to be good. Kane stood at the front. Behind him, a satellite image filled the screen, grainy, angled, time-stamped from 3 days before the ambush. We pulled comms intercepts from the valley, he said. No preamble. Someone transmitted our route 26 hours before we crossed that creek bed. Silence around the table. The transmission originated from a satellite relay assigned to this base, Kane continued, which means our leak isn't in the field. He looked at Vera. It's here. Her stomach dropped, slow and cold. Command staff had the route, she said. You said 4 people. Kane nodded, pulled up a second image and org chart, 4 names highlighted in red. Colonel Rourke, he said. Cleared him, already. Alibi checks out, and frankly he's the one who's been protecting your clearance from your own father for the past month. Doesn't fit. Next name, Lieutenant Colonel O.C., legal officer. Also cleared. He wasn't even briefed on the operational route, only the personnel matter. Third name, Major Weiss, logistics, possible but no access to the satellite relay in question. He hesitated on the 4th name, long enough that Vera felt the pause before she read it. Colonel Preston Vance, he said. The name meant nothing to her at first, just letters on a screen. Then Kane added the detail that changed everything. Deputy Operations Commander, he said. 22 years of service. And according to base records, he looked at her directly now, and something in his eyes told her the next sentence was going to hurt before it even landed. A personal friend of your father's. Golf partner. Regular guest at family functions for the last 11 years. The room seemed to tilt, very slightly, the way rooms do when the ground beneath them turns out to be less solid than you thought. She sat with that for a moment, because Vance wasn't a stranger. She'd shaken his hand at a 4th of July barbecue when she was 26 years old, home on leave, still hoping her father might one day look at her the way he looked at that man, with easy, unguarded trust. You're saying, she said slowly, that the leak is someone who's been sitting at my parents' dinner table for over a decade. I'm saying it's the strongest lead we've got, Kane said, and I need you to be honest with me right now. Can you work this objectively? Or does the connection compromise you? She thought about the answer longer than she wanted to, because the honest answer was complicated. Vance wasn't family, wasn't blood, but he'd been woven into the fabric of her childhood the way certain adults get woven in without anyone asking permission. Present at graduations, present at holidays, always with a firm handshake and a joke that landed a half-second too smug. If he'd sold out an active mission, sold out lives, for money or leverage or whatever motive men like that operated on, then he'd been standing in her family's living room the entire time, smiling, while planning to get people killed. "I can work it," she said, steady. Kane studied her a moment longer, looking, she suspected, for the crack that would tell him she was lying. He didn't find one. "Then we move quiet," he said. "No accusations, no confrontation. We build the case first, because if we tip him off before we have proof, he disappears, and we lose the only thread connecting this ambush to whoever's buying intelligence out of this base." "Understood," Vera said. Kane closed the laptop. "One more thing," he said. She waited. "Your father's phone records show 3 calls to Vance's personal cell in the past week," he said. "Each one placed within an hour of him trying to access your personnel file." The room went quiet in a different way now. A way that felt less like tactical planning and more like watching a slow-motion collision from a front-row seat you never asked for. "Are you saying my father's involved?" she asked. Voice flat, careful. "I'm saying I don't know yet," Kane said. "And neither do you, so if you don't guess, we follow the evidence." She nodded, but something cold had settled into her chest that no amount of tactical discipline was going to fully dislodge. Because for the first time in this entire fight, the danger wasn't abstract anymore. It had a name attached to a face she'd trusted, sitting 1 degree away from the man who'd raised her. That night she couldn't sleep at all. Lay on her rack in the officers' quarters, staring at a ceiling tile with a water stain shaped vaguely like Florida, and let her mind run through every memory of Preston Vance she could dig up. The 4th of July barbecue, his hand on her shoulder, congratulating her on making captain. "Because I remember when you were knee-high, running around this yard with a plastic rifle," he'd said, laughing, and her father had laughed too, the two of them sharing something easy and warm that she'd never once been included in. She remembered him at her grandmother's funeral, standing beside her father at the graveside, one hand on his shoulder, steady, the way real friends stand when the ground gets uneven. 11 years of birthday dinners and promotion ceremonies and quiet handshakes in hallways. And underneath all of it, apparently, something rotten enough to get American soldiers killed for a price. She thought of Rossi's hands shaking as he packed his gear, thought of the 2 hostages who'd come within a hair's breadth of dying in that valley, because someone with a security clearance had decided their lives were worth less than whatever they were being paid. She got up, poured a glass of water she didn't drink, sat at the small desk in the corner of her quarters, and opened her laptop instead, pulling up everything on the public record about Colonel Preston Vance. 22 years of service, clean record on paper, 2 divorces, a house in a neighborhood well above what a colonel's salary should comfortably support, a boat recently purchased, according to a county registration database she probably shouldn't have had access to but did. A boat. She stared at that detail longer than the rest, because men who sold secrets rarely did it for ideology. Usually it was simpler than that. Usually it was a boat, a house, a number in a bank account that made all the moral math feel temporarily survivable. She sent what she'd found to Kane's secure line at 300 with a single line attached. "Follow the money." His reply came back 9 minutes later. "Already are. Get some sleep, Ghost. You'll need it." She didn't sleep, but she closed the laptop and lay back down and let the ceiling stain keep her company until the sky outside her window finally turned gray with morning. 3 days later the recording surfaced. Not the ambush intercept, the other one OC's call log, the recorded conversation of her father demanding her personnel file under threat of career-ending retaliation. Someone had leaked it. Not OC, Vera believed that instantly, without needing proof, because the man had risked his own neck to protect her in the first place. No, someone else had gotten hold of it and decided the base needed to hear exactly what General Desmond Holloway sounded like when he thought no one outside the room was listening. By 900 it was everywhere. passed hand to hand on encrypted messaging threads that weren't supposed to exist, whispered about in hallways, replayed in break rooms with the volume turned low and the door mostly closed. Vera heard it herself around noon, standing in the intelligence wing, a lieutenant she barely knew holding up a phone with an expression somewhere between horror and fascination. "You should hear this, ma'am," he said, then seemed to remember whose recording it was. "Or maybe you shouldn't. I don't know. Sorry." She took the phone anyway, because if the whole base was going to hear her father threaten a subordinate's career over her classified file, she wasn't going to be the last person on post to know what he'd actually said. She pressed play. Her father's voice, tinny through the phone speaker, but unmistakably his. The particular cadence he used when he thought volume was the same thing as authority. "I am a 3-star general. I am the base commander. I am her father. Do not quote protocol to me, Colonel. I want to see her file." Then Osei's voice, calm in a way that must have taken enormous effort. "Sir, Major Holloway is assigned to a special access program under joint jurisdiction. Her file is classified beyond your clearance tier. I don't have the authority to release it, and frankly, neither do you have the authority to compel me." A pause. Then her father again, voice climbing, shrill in a way she'd never once heard from him in 33 years of being afraid of it. "This is insubordination. I will have your stars, Rourke. I will have you scrubbing latrines in Alaska." Wrong name. He'd called Osei by Rourke's name, too furious to keep his own targets straight, and somehow that small detail made the whole recording feel even worse. Made it feel less like calculated cruelty, and more like a man completely unraveling in real time. Then Osei's final line, delivered with the flat precision of someone reading a man his rights. "General Holloway, I must remind you this line is recorded for security purposes. Any attempt to coerce a subordinate into revealing classified information regarding an active special access asset is a felony under federal law. Are you ordering me to commit a felony, sir? Or would you like to terminate this call?" Silence. 10 full seconds of nothing but her father's breathing, ragged and heavy, before the click of the call ending. Vera handed the phone back. Her hands were steady. Her voice, when she spoke, came out flatter than she expected. "Thank you for showing me," she said. She walked out of the intelligence wing and didn't stop walking until she'd reached the edge of the flight line, where the noise of the base fell away behind her, and there was nothing left but wind and the distant whine of an engine somewhere doing pre-flight checks. She stood there a long time, because some small, stupid, stubborn part of her had wanted to feel vindicated hearing that recording, had wanted the satisfaction of watching her father's cruelty finally catch up to him in a way the whole base could witness. Instead, she just felt tired, because a felony charge over a classified personnel file was one thing. But underneath it, underneath all of it, was a man so consumed by control that he'd rather commit a crime than accept he didn't own his own daughter anymore. And that wasn't satisfying. That was just sad. She didn't call him, didn't reach out, let the silence between them do whatever it was going to do. Because she had a leak to find, and a mission to run, and she couldn't afford to let her father's unraveling become her problem to manage. Not this time. But that night, lying awake again, she let herself feel it, just for a few minutes. The particular grief of watching someone you'd spent your whole life trying to please turn out to be smaller, in the end, than the fear he'd built his entire identity on top of. Kane called her into a secure room 2 days later, and the moment she saw his face, she knew the picture had changed. "We got him," he said. "Vance." He nodded, pulled up a financial trail on the laptop screen wire transfers. 3 of them over the past 4 months, routed through an offshore account and landing, eventually, in a numbered account tied to a shell company registered in Vance's ex-wife's maiden name. $240,000, Kane said. Paid out in installments that line up almost exactly with 3 separate operational compromises over the past 6 months, including the ambush in Kestrel. Vera stared at the numbers, felt something in her chest go very still and very cold. "Who's paying him?" she asked. "Working on that," Kane said. "But here's the part you need to hear directly from me before you hear it from anyone else." He turned the laptop toward her. "Cell tower data puts Vance within 2 miles of your father's residence 4 times in the past 10 days, he said, including the night before your father made that call to Osei. She felt her pulse pick up. You think they're coordinating? I think, Kane said, carefully, that your father has no idea what his friend's been doing. I think Vance has been using his access to your father, his standing in this family, as cover. Nobody questions the man who shows up at every holiday dinner. But I also think, Kane said, that we need to bring your father in on this, carefully, because if Vance realizes we're closing in, and your father is still calling him, still trusting him with information, he could tip him off without even knowing it. Vera finished. Exactly. She sat back, the weight of it settling over her slow and heavy like sediment, finally reaching the bottom of still water. Because the plan that made tactical sense, the plan that protected the mission, protected the evidence, protected 200 people currently spread across a compromised valley, trusting a chain of command that had a hole in it. That plan required her to walk back into her father's life, voluntarily, after everything. Required her to warn a man who'd called her a zero in front of 200 officers that his oldest friend was selling American lives to the highest bidder. I'll do it, she said. You don't have to be the one, Kane said. I can send someone else. She shook her head. No, she said. He won't believe anyone else. Not fully, not fast enough. And there was something else underneath that, something she didn't say out loud, because it felt too complicated to hand to Kane fully formed. Because some part of her, some old, stubborn 13-year-old part that had hidden ribbons in a shoebox still, wanted to be the one who saved him. Even now, even after everything, she hated that part of herself a little. But Chen Shiva wasn't going to let it get anyone killed by pretending it wasn't there. I'll go tonight, she said. Kane studied her for a long moment. Be careful, he said, finally. Not as a colonel giving an order, as something closer to a friend. I'm always careful, she said. He almost smiled. No, he said, you're always precise. There's a difference. She drove to her parents' house alone. No uniform, just jeans and a jacket that did nothing against the sudden chill that had rolled in off the water that evening. The porch light was on, the same porch light that had been on every night of her childhood, welcoming everyone in that neighborhood, except it often felt her. She knocked. Her mother answered. Adelaide Holloway, still beautiful in the particular way of women who'd spent decades perfecting the art of looking untroubled, opened the door and froze. Vera, she breathed. Is Dad home? Something crossed her mother's face, relief, maybe, or fear, or some tangled combination of both that Vera had never quite learned to name. He's in his study, Adelaide said. Honey, is everything all right? No, Vera said. Honestly, for once. It's not. I need to talk to him now. Her father was sitting behind his desk when she walked in, reading glasses low on his nose, a glass of scotch he hadn't touched, sitting untouched beside a stack of paperwork. He looked up, startled, then guarded, then something that almost looked like hope before he caught himself and buried it. Vera, he said, what are you doing here? I need to ask you something, she said, and I need you to answer honestly, because people's lives depend on it. He straightened slightly. All right, he said. How well do you know Preston Vance? She asked. Something flickered across his face. Confusion, first, then a defensive stiffening she recognized instantly, the same posture he'd used her entire childhood, whenever a question got too close to something he didn't want examined. Preston's one of my oldest friends, he said. What kind of question is that? Have you talked to him recently? She pressed. In the last week. We had dinner Tuesday, he said. Why does that matter? Did you tell him anything about me? She asked. About my clearance, my assignment, anything at all. Her father's face went through several expressions in quick succession, and she watched each one land like a small confirmation she didn't want. I might have mentioned, he started, slowly, that you'd been read into something significant. I was proud, Vera. For the first time, in longer than I want to admit, I was proud of you, and I wanted someone to know it. And Preston's been like a brother to me for 20 years. So he stopped. Saw something in her face that made the rest of the sentence die in his throat. What? He said. What is it? She sat down across from him, steadied her voice the way she'd steady a rifle before a shot she couldn't afford to miss. Preston Vance has been selling operational intelligence, she said, to someone outside this country. For money. It's tied to an ambush that nearly got an entire team killed 6 days ago. The color drained out of her father's face so completely, so fast, that for one terrible second she thought he might actually be having the stroke Thompson had joked about. He started. That's not possible. I've known that man for 20 years. He was at your grandmother's funeral. He held me up at that grave, Vera. He's family. He's been using you, she said. Gently as she knew how to deliver something this brutal. Using this family. Using your trust in him as cover, so nobody would question why he had access to things he shouldn't have had access to. Her father sat very still. And every time you told him something, she continued. Every proud father moment. Every dinner where you bragged just a little, because, for once you had something good to say about me, you handed him exactly what he needed. I didn't know, he whispered. I know, she said. I know, Dad. The word came out before she'd fully decided to say it, and it landed strangely in the room, strangely in her own chest, the first time she'd called him that since the briefing room 7 days ago. He looked up at her, something raw and unguarded in his face that she'd almost never seen there before. Not in 33 years, not once. What do you need from me? He asked. Quiet. I need you to keep having dinner with him, she said. Like nothing's changed. I need you to not tip him off. And I need you to trust me, to keep completely. For the next 72 hours, even when it doesn't make sense. He was quiet a long moment. Then he nodded. Okay, he said. Vera, okay. It was the smallest word, the plainest agreement. But it was the first time in her entire life her father had said yes to her without a condition attached, without a lecture folded inside it, without some quiet insistence that he knew better. She stood to leave, stopped at the doorway. One more thing, she said. He looked up. The recording, she said. The one that's all over the base. His jaw tightened, shame moving visibly across his face. I heard it, she said. Everyone heard it. I know, he said, voice barely above a whisper. She didn't say it's okay because it wasn't. Didn't say I forgive you, because she wasn't there yet, might never fully get there, and she'd learned enough in the last decade to stop lying to herself about things like that just to make a room more comfortable. She just said, we'll talk about that later, when this is over, and walked out into the dark, leaving her father sitting alone behind his desk, an untouched glass of scotch beside him, looking, for the first time she could ever remember, genuinely and completely afraid, not of losing rank, of losing her. 3 days later, at 430, a joint team moved on Preston Vance's residence in a quiet neighborhood 20 minutes from base. Vera wasn't part of the arrest team. Kane had made that call, and she hadn't argued it, understanding without needing it explained that this particular operation needed distance from anything that could look, later, like a personal vendetta. She sat instead in the operations center, listening to the radio traffic, watching a red dot on a screen represent a man who'd sat at her family's table for over a decade, while quietly deciding their trust was worth exactly $240,000. Team in position, a voice crackled. Breach in 3, 2, 1. A burst of noise, shouting. The particular controlled chaos of a well-executed arrest. Subject secure, the voice said. 20 seconds later, no shots fired. Vera let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for 6 days straight. Kane found her an hour later, still sitting in the same chair, staring at a now empty screen. It's done, he said. Vance is in custody. Financial trails solid. He'll be talking to federal investigators before the sun's fully up. She nodded. Didn't trust her voice yet. You did good work, Kane said. Both the mission and this. Most people couldn't have separated the two. I'm not sure I did, she admitted. Not fully. He sat down across from her, quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, he said eventually. Your father made the right call. Kept his mouth shut. Didn't tip anything off. That took something, coming from a man like that. It did, she agreed. Doesn't fix everything, Kane said. No, she agreed again. It doesn't, but it's not nothing. She looked at him, and for the first time, in longer than she could remember, she let herself feel something close to hope. Not the desperate, hungry hope of a child still waiting for a crumb of approval, but something quieter. Something that didn't need him to become a different man entirely. Just needed him to keep choosing, one small decision at a time, to be a little better than he'd been before. It's not nothing, she repeated, mostly to herself. Outside the operations center, the sun was coming up over Florida, gold light spilling across the tarmac, the same way it had the morning she'd first climbed into Kane's helicopter and left her father's version of her behind for good. She stood at the window and watched it rise. Because the mission was over, The leak was closed. The valley was safer. The hostages home. The man who'd sold them out sitting in a federal holding cell where he belonged. But the harder work, the work between her and the man behind that desk, the work of figuring out what, if anything, could still be salvaged after 33 years of being told she was a zero. That work was only just beginning, and for once she wasn't dreading it. She was ready. The Starbucks sat 3 blocks from the bay, the kind of place that could have been anywhere in America, and that was exactly why she'd chosen it. Neutral ground. Not the house with the shadow boxes. Not the base with its weight of rank and protocol pressing down on every word before it left your mouth. Just tables. Just coffee. Just 2 people trying to figure out what was left standing after the smoke cleared. Vera arrived 5 minutes early. Punctuality was a habit she'd never managed to break. Not even now. Not even for this. She ordered black coffee, no sugar, and took a table in the back corner where she could see the door. Old habit too. Always see the door. The air conditioning inside ran cold enough to fog the front windows, a sharp contrast against the humid Florida morning outside. Somewhere overhead, indie folk music competed politely with the aggressive whir of the espresso machine, and the whole place smelled like roasted beans and burnt milk and the particular anonymity of a chain coffee shop that had seen 1,000 hard conversations happen at its little round tables and never once cared which one this was. When he walked in, she almost didn't recognize him, because General Desmond Holloway had always been a man of structure. Even on weekends, his shirts were starched. His shoes were polished enough to catch light. His posture rigid enough that you could have leveled a shelf against his spine and trusted the reading. The man who walked through the glass door that morning looked like someone else entirely. Beige, polo slightly too loose in the shoulders, wrinkled khaki shorts, loafers instead of the dress shoes she'd never once seen him without the uniform, without the stars propping up everything he wanted people to believe about him. He looked smalls. He spotted her, hesitated at the door, just for a second, and she saw something in his face that looked almost like the urge to turn around and leave. Then he steadied himself, walked over. "Vera," he said. His voice had none of its usual boom. Scratchy, tentative. A voice she didn't recognize coming out of a man she'd spent 33 years being afraid of. "Dad," she said, nodded at the empty chair across from her. He sat, heavily, like the chair had to catch something more than just his weight. He had a paper cup in his hands, and he started peeling the cardboard sleeve off it in careful little strips, a nervous habit she'd never once seen from him before. Because the general didn't fidget. The general commanded rooms. The general didn't sit across from anyone looking like he might come apart at the seams if she said the wrong thing. "You look well," he said, not looking at her directly. Everything went all right out there?" "Mission's closed," she said. "We got the hostages home. Vance is in federal custody. Should be arraigned within the month." "Right," he said. "Good, that's good." Silence stretched out between them. Not the comfortable kind 2 people share when words aren't necessary. The other kind. The kind with a live wire running through it. He took a sip of his coffee, grimaced. "Too hot," he muttered. "Set it back down. Everything's too hot these days." She waited, because she'd learned somewhere in the last decade that silence was a tool just like a rifle scope. "You didn't fill it just because it made you uncomfortable. You let it do its work, Vera," he said finally. "About that day at the briefing. Here it comes," she thought. The justification, the pivot, the version of events where somehow he comes out looking like the reasonable one. "I didn't know," he said. Spread his hands out on the table, helpless, like a man surrendering something he couldn't quite name. "I had no idea you were involved in anything at that level. If you had known what?" she asked. Voice level. "I would have treated you differently," he said. "I would have listened. I would have protected you." Something in her chest went tight and cold at that word. "Protected me," she repeated. He looked up, a flash of the old general breaking through, the reflex of a man used to explaining himself into victory. "Do you have any idea how dangerous that world is?" he said. "Black operations, federal oversight. It's a meat grinder, Vera. I pushed you toward administration because I wanted you safe, wanted you to have a normal life, a husband, children, Sundays off." He leaned forward, eyes pleading in a way she'd never once seen from him, not in 33 years, not once. "I'm your father," he said. "My job is to keep you safe. I only ever wanted what was best for you." She recognized the shape of it instantly. The classic defense. I didn't do it, and if I did, it wasn't that bad, and if it was, I did it for your own good. She looked at him, really looked, saw the fear hiding behind the bluster, the way she'd learned to spot camouflage in terrain that wanted to hide it. Because he wasn't just afraid for her safety. He never had been, not really. He was afraid of his own irrelevance. Afraid that the daughter he'd always treated as an extension of his own image had grown a life he couldn't control, couldn't script, couldn't fold neatly into the story he told at dinner parties. She thought of the Boundaries book Thompson had shoved into her hands 2 years ago, dog-eared and underlined in 3 different colors. Boundaries define us. They define what is me and what is not me. A boundary shows me where I end and someone else begins. For 33 years she'd had none. She'd just been an annex of his ego, wearing whatever shape he needed her to wear at any given dinner party. Not anymore. She didn't yell, didn't cry, didn't list every failure, or throw the past across the table like something she needed him to catch. That would have been what a child does. She placed her hands flat on the table instead. Steady, she said, her voice low, level, absolute. He stopped tearing at the coffee sleeve. I am not a child you need to protect, she said. I am a field-grade officer in the United States Air Force. I have made decisions under fire that saved lives. I don't need your protection, but let me finish. He opened his mouth. She held his gaze, and the words died in his throat. I understand you think you were helping, she continued, but you weren't. You were erasing me. You were ashamed of who I actually was, because I didn't fit the picture you wanted to paint for your friends. He flinched. Actually flinched, like the words had physical weight. We are going to have a new relationship, Dad, she said. Or we are going to have no relationship at all. He blinked, stunned. Vera, he started. We're family, she said. Is not a free pass to disrespect me. She leaned in slightly, made sure every syllable landed exactly where she wanted it. So, here are the rules, she said. This is the new baseline. Number 1. You will never dismiss my rank or my service in public again. Number 2. You will never call me Little Vera or ask me to fetch drinks like I'm the help. Number 3. You do not get to take credit for my achievements. And you do not get to lie about them to save face at some cocktail party. She paused, took a breath. This was the hardest part. The part where she let go of needing anything from him at all. I don't need you to be proud of me, Dad, she said, her voice softening just a fraction. Just enough. I really don't. I'm proud of myself. What I need is for you to respect me as an adult, as an equal. The cafe noise seemed to fade around them. The grinder stopped mid-cycle. The music dipped between songs. Just silence and her father sitting there, frozen, looking at her like he was seeing her for the very first time in 33 years. Looking for the desperate girl who used to hide ribbons under her bed. Looking for the teenager who begged for his attention across a Thanksgiving table. They were gone. Sitting across from him, instead, was a woman who didn't need him. And that realization seemed to age him another 5 years. Right there, in real time, in a Starbucks that smelled like burnt milk and indie folk music. He looked down at his coffee cup, shredded now, cold. He took a long, shaky breath. He started, voice cracking. He cleared his throat, tried again. I didn't realize how much I'd missed. It wasn't a full apology, wasn't a confession of guilt laid bare and complete, but for a man like Desmond Holloway it was a white flag, the closest thing to surrender he had in him. He looked up. The arrogance was gone from his face. In its place something quiet, resigned, almost peaceful, in the way exhaustion sometimes looks like peace from a distance. Respect, he repeated, tasting the word like it was unfamiliar in his mouth. Okay, Vera. He nodded. Slow, deliberate, a salute without the hand. Okay, she echoed. She finished her coffee, cold now, bitter, but it tasted like something close to victory anyway. She stood. I have to get back to base, she said. Briefing at 1400. He stood too, out of habit, out of something older than habit. Right, he said. Duty calls. There was a moment where a hug might have happened, in a different kind of story. A softer one, a movie moment where the music swells and the two of them fall into each other, and everything before this gets forgiven in a single embrace. This wasn't that story. They didn't hug, didn't cry. The distance between them was still there, vast and scarred over in places that would never fully heal smooth. But there was a bridge now, narrow, fragile, built brick by brick out of boundaries instead of apologies. Drive safe, Major, he said. She paused. He'd called her Major, not sweetheart, not honey Major. You too, Desmond, she said. She didn't call him Dad, not right then. Called him by his name instead, acknowledging him as a man-flawed human, aging in a polo shirt that fit him wrong rather than the god he'd spent his whole life trying to convince everyone, including himself, that he was. She turned and walked out of the Starbucks, pushed open the glass door into blinding Florida sun. The heat wrapped around her immediately. She didn't mind it. She walked to her car, unlocked it, sat in the driver's seat and checked the rearview mirror before pulling out. Another old habit, always check what's behind you before you move forward. Through the window of the cafe, she could see him, still sitting at the table, staring at the empty chair where she'd been. She put the car in gear, drove away. She hadn't won a war, hadn't destroyed him, hadn't needed to. She'd done something harder. She'd redefined the terms of peace. And for the first time in her entire adult life, driving down a sun-bleached Florida street with the windows cracked and the radio off, she felt something she didn't have an easy name for. Maybe it was just freedom. Maybe that was enough of a name. The federal case against Preston Vance moved faster than anyone expected. Faster, certainly, than Vera had braced herself for. Within 6 weeks, he'd taken a plea agreement rather than risk trial, and the details that came out in the process painted a picture uglier than even the financial records had suggested. Because the money hadn't started with greed, not exactly. It had started with debt, 2 divorces, a lifestyle he couldn't sustain on a colonel's pension, a boat he'd bought to impress a woman who'd left him anyway before the down payment cleared. And somewhere in that financial free fall, a foreign contact had found him, had offered a way out that felt, at first, like nothing at all. A dinner, a question about troop movements that seemed harmless in isolation, and then another question, and another. By the time he understood what he'd become, he told investigators, he didn't know how to stop. Vera read the plea transcript once, in full, sitting alone in her quarters, with a cup of coffee going cold beside her. Read the part where Vance described sitting at Thanksgiving dinners with her family, year after year, while quietly deciding their trust was a resource he could spend. She closed the laptop when she was done. Didn't cry. Didn't feel the satisfaction she'd expected either. Just felt tired, the particular exhaustion of watching someone confirm exactly how far a person could fall when they stopped believing they had anything left to lose. Her father called her the week the plea deal became public. She almost didn't answer, then she did. I owe him an apology, her father said. No preamble, just straight into it, like he'd been rehearsing the sentence for days and couldn't hold it in any longer. 20 years, Vera. I trusted that man with everything, and the whole time. You didn't know, she said, quiet, because it was true, and because some part of her needed to say it, even though she wasn't entirely sure she'd forgiven him yet for everything else. I should have known, he said. I built my whole life around being able to read people, around commanding a room, and I missed the one person closest to me who was rotting from the inside the entire time. She was quiet, for a moment. Let him sit with that. Maybe, she said finally, that's the lesson in it. That being loud in a room isn't the same thing as actually seeing the people in it. Silence on the line, long enough that she wondered if she'd pushed too far, too fast, cracked something that wasn't ready to be cracked yet. Then his voice came back. Rougher than before, he said. That's more than fair. It was, she realized later, the first time in her entire life he'd agreed with her without qualifying it, without finding some way to make it also about him. Small, but not nothing. Life, in the months that followed, took on a shape she hadn't quite let herself imagine before. Not because everything was suddenly easy. It wasn't, and she'd stopped expecting it to be, but because for the first time she wasn't spending half her energy bracing for the next blow. She threw herself into work. Command track opened up again. This time, without her father's quiet interference closing doors behind her back before she even knew they existed. She made lieutenant colonel 18 months later. The promotion board, citing operational leadership, exceptional judgment under pressure, and a phrase that made her laugh out loud alone, in her car, when she first read it, demonstrated integrity in circumstances of significant personal complexity. Bureaucratic language, for I found out my father's best friend was a traitor, and I still did my job. Thompson retired the following spring. Small ceremony, mostly just the unit, folding chairs set up on a strip of grass behind the hangar, because Thompson had made it explicitly clear she didn't want anything fancier than that. Vera stood up to say a few words, and found, halfway through, that her voice wasn't as steady as she'd planned for it to be. Bree Thompson told me something once, in a bar that smelled like spilled beer and better decisions than the ones we usually made there, she said. Told me not to let anyone's shadow block my sun. She looked out at the small crowd, found Thompson's face near the front, arms crossed, trying and failing to look unmoved. I didn't understand it at the time, Vera continued. I understood it about a year later, standing in a briefing room, doing exactly what she told me to do. Thompson didn't cry. Thompson didn't do crying, not in public, not ever. But her jaw worked once, hard, and she looked away toward the runway for a second longer than the moment strictly required. That was enough. Vera understood it as exactly the kind of goodbye Thompson could actually give. Kane rotated to a different command 18 months after the Kestrel operation, promoted, his own trajectory bending upward, the way trajectories do for people who keep proving, mission after mission, that they can be trusted with things other people can't handle. Before he left, he found her on the flight line, one last time, the same kind of Florida evening, where the whole sky goes gold and orange and briefly, deceptively soft. You did good work here, Holloway, he said. We did good work, she corrected. He almost smiled, the closest thing to a full smile she'd ever gotten out of him in 3 years of shared operations. If you ever get tired of the desk track, he said, you know where to find me. I'll keep that in mind, Colonel. He extended a hand. She shook it, firm. The handshake of two people who'd trusted each other with their lives more than once and didn't need a speech to say what that was worth. Then he was gone, off toward whatever came next, and she stood there a moment longer, watching the sun finish sinking below the tree line, feeling the particular ache of losing someone who'd never once made her feel small. 10 years is a strange unit of time to try to hold in your hands all at once. It doesn't feel like a decade while you're living it. It feels like 1,000 small Tuesdays, stacked one on top of another, each one demanding its own attention, its own set of small decisions. And then one day you look up, and the mirror shows you a face, with new lines at the corners of the eyes, and someone calls you ma'am without a flicker of irony, and you realize the 1,000 Tuesdays added up to something enormous while you weren't watching closely enough to notice. The auditorium at a different base now, Langley, this time a transfer she'd requested 2 years earlier, when a position opened that let her build something, instead of just executing someone else's plan for once filled to capacity that morning. The air smelled like floor wax and fresh-cut lilies someone had arranged near the podium, trying, and mostly succeeding, to make a military ceremony feel like an occasion instead of just another Tuesday in uniform. The American flag stood at the front of the stage, gold fringe catching the overhead lights, unmoving in air that the building's climate system kept perfectly, deliberately still. Vera Holloway stood at that podium. Her uniform had changed since that first briefing room a decade earlier. The gold oak leaves of a major, gone. In their place, the silver oak leaves of a lieutenant colonel, soon pending the vote that would happen in this very ceremony, to become something new entirely. She looked out at the room, 200 faces looking back at her, give or take. They weren't looking at her with fear, weren't looking at her because rank compelled them to. They were looking at her with something closer to trust. She was their commander now, in the fullest sense of the word, and she'd earned every ounce of the way they were sitting up a little straighter in their chairs because of it. Attention, to orders, the adjutant called out. The room snapped upright as one body, 200 pairs of boots hitting polished floor in a single unified sound, like distant thunder arriving all at once instead of rolling in slowly. She didn't flinch at the sound the way she once might have, just stood there, breathing it in, letting the moment be exactly as large as it actually was. Her eyes moved across the front row, usually reserved for visiting brass, for the people whose presence signaled how much weight an event was supposed to carry. Today, there was an old man sitting in the seat of honor, Desmond Holloway, 73 years old now. He'd retired 8 years earlier, a quiet retirement, no farewell parade, no grand ceremony of his own. He'd asked for none of it, which had surprised her more than almost anything else in the entire decade that followed their conversation at that Starbucks table. He wasn't wearing his dress uniform. He wore a charcoal gray suit that fit him a little too loosely now, the way suits do on men whose bodies have quietly begun negotiating new terms with time. His hair, once silver and cut into that high and tight that had defied gravity for decades, had gone fully white and thin, combed carefully over a scalp that showed through more than it used to. He wasn't the god of war anymore. He was just a grandfather, these days, who golfed on Tuesdays when his knees allowed it and complained, loudly and often, about a knee replacement he kept putting off. He hadn't been invited up onto the stage. That honor, the pinning of the new rank Vera, had reserved for someone else entirely. Bree Thompson stood at the podium beside her, retired 5 years now, walking with a cane these days, but with the same sharp, appraising eyes that had once told a devastated young major not to let anyone's shadow block her son. It was a subtle choice, giving Thompson that honor instead of her father, but it was deliberate. Rank, Vera had come to believe with total certainty, is earned in the trenches, not inherited through a shared last name. As Thompson's steady hands fastened the new insignia onto her collar, the silver eagle of a full colonel, now, a rank she'd have laughed at the idea of a decade earlier, sitting in the back row of a briefing room being called a zero Vera, glanced down at the front row. Her father was crying. Not the performance of emotion he'd once been so skilled at deploying in rooms full of senators and contractors. Quiet, actual tears, tracking down cheeks that had lost their firmness somewhere in the last decade, cheeks that had earned every line time, had carved into them. He caught her eye, offered a small, wobbly smile. It was a sad smile, the smile of a man who understood, fully now, that he'd spent 30 years betting on the wrong horse, but who was, finally, genuinely grateful he'd been allowed to stay close enough to watch this particular race finish. She nodded at him. Not forgiveness exactly. Something adjacent to it, acknowledgement, a kind of peace that didn't require either of them to pretend the last decade hadn't happened. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said into the microphone, voice clear and steady, in a way that would have made her 21-year-old self, staring at a cruel text message in a hospital bed, completely unrecognizable to her now. "Command is not a privilege," she said. "It is a burden, and it is a burden I will carry for you, not over you." She didn't quote any of the old war strategists whose books lined half the offices on this base, didn't reach for anything borrowed, spoke to the room instead, like they were exactly what they were. People, human beings who'd chosen to put on a uniform and trust the person standing at this podium with their lives. Treated them with the exact dignity she'd starved for once, as a young officer sitting in the back row of a room that didn't see her at all. After the ceremony, the reception line formed. Punch and sheet cake, the particular understated celebration the military does so well. All folding tables and paper cups and the low hum of 200 conversations happening at once. Her father stayed toward the back of the room, holding a cup of punch he didn't drink much of, watching her work the crowd from a respectful distance. He didn't try to take over the moment the way the old Desmond Holloway would have, inserting himself into every conversation, redirecting every compliment back toward his own reflected glory. He didn't interrupt, stayed exactly within the boundaries they'd built together, brick by careful brick, over 10 patient years. A young woman approached Vera near the end of the line. Second lieutenant, fresh out of the academy, uniform so new it still had that stiff, uncomfortable look of fabric that hadn't yet learned the shape of the body wearing it. She looked terrified. "Ma'am," she said, voice small, "Lieutenant Casey Doyle. I wanted to say congratulations." Vera smiled, remembered, with a sudden vivid clarity, being exactly that terrified once, in a room not unlike this one. "Thank you, Lieutenant," she said. "How are you settling into the squadron?" Doyle hesitated, glanced around, quick, to make sure no one else was close enough to hear. "It's hard, ma'am," she admitted. My father's a colonel over in the Army side. He thinks the Air Forces, he wanted me to go into logistics instead. Says intelligence work is a waste of what I could be doing somewhere more visible." Vera went very still. The words were different. The details had shifted, the branches and titles rearranged into a slightly different configuration. But the melody underneath it was identical. The exact same tune she'd been hearing her entire life, now playing itself out in a brand new voice, a full generation removed from her own childhood dinner table. She handed her half-finished slice of cake to an aide standing nearby, turned her full attention onto the young lieutenant in front of her, stepped in slightly closer. Not to intimidate, to shield, Lieutenant, she said firm. Look at me. Doyle looked up, eyes wide. I'm going to tell you something, Vera said, that took me 33 years and a great deal of heartache to actually learn. She paused, made sure the next sentence landed exactly where it needed to. Your father may have given you your name, she said, but he does not get to write your story. Doyle blinked, visibly startled by the intensity behind the words. Do not let anyone define your value, Vera continued. Not your enemies, and certainly not your blood. You are not here to be his legacy, she said. You are here to build your own. The young lieutenant straightened, subtle, but Vera saw it clearly. A small shift of weight, a slight lift through the spine, the earliest visible beginning of a backbone learning, for the first time, what it felt like to hold its own weight. Yes, ma'am, Doyle said, and this time her voice didn't squeak. Thank you, Colonel. Carry on, Lieutenant, Vera said. She watched the young woman walk away, walking a little taller than she had 5 minutes earlier. A line drifted through Vera's mind, something she'd read during one of those long, sleepless nights a decade earlier, half a world away from this room. I come as one, but I stand as 10,000. She wasn't just Vera anymore. She was the sum of every woman who'd ever been told to sit down, every daughter who'd ever been told they weren't quite enough for the table they'd been born into. She stood for them, whether they knew it or not. The reception wound down slowly, the way these things always do, until the room had emptied out to just staff clearing tables and the last stragglers saying their goodbyes. Her father crossed the room to find her, moved slower these days than he used to, the particular careful walk of a man whose knees had started sending him bills for 30 years of golf and standing rigid, at attention. That was a good speech, Vera, he said. Soft. Thanks, Dad. He looked at the silver eagle on her collar, reached out a hand, hovering it near her shoulder for a moment, before finally settling it there. Gentle. Awkward. You wear it better than I ever did, he said. It was, she understood immediately, the closest he would ever come to fully admitting he'd been wrong. And somehow, standing there in an emptying auditorium, a decade after he'd called her a zero in front of 200 officers, it was enough. Do you want to get dinner? He asked. Your mother's making pot roast. She checked her watch. I can't tonight, she said. I've got a flight to catch. Pentagon briefing in the morning. He nodded. A flicker of disappointment crossed his face, quick, before he smoothed it over the way he'd learned to do over the last 10 years, no longer demanding the world rearrange itself around his feelings the instant they surfaced. Of course, he said. Duty first, I understand. I'll call you Sunday, she said. Sunday, he repeated, testing the word like a promise he wanted to hold on to carefully. Okay. He turned, walked toward the exit, a little slower than he used to, a lone figure crossing a big empty hall. She watched him go, felt a small twinge of something that might have been sadness, might have been the particular ache of loving someone imperfectly across a distance that would never fully close. But no guilt, not anymore. She had forgiven him. Not the same as forgetting. The scar was permanent, would always be there, a reminder of exactly where the boundary line needed to stay drawn. But forgiveness, real forgiveness, didn't require forgetting. It just required deciding not to let the wound keep bleeding forever. She turned and walked out the side exit into the evening air. Virginia's sun hit her face, warm and gold, the kind of light that made even an ordinary parking lot look like something worth remembering. The sky above the base stretched out endless and blue, the exact kind of sky that had always made her want to be up in it instead of standing underneath it. She took a deep breath, filled her lungs with air that tasted, distinctly, like freedom. She wasn't the desperate girl who'd hidden ribbons under her bed anymore. Wasn't even Ghost 13. Not really. Not in the way that name had once defined every part of her, a call sign she'd needed to survive a version of her life that required her to disappear completely in order to matter at all. She walked toward her car, heels clicking a steady rhythm against the pavement. Didn't need to hide anymore. Didn't need to vanish to be seen. Her name was Vera Holloway. She was a full colonel in the United States Air Force, and for the first time in her entire life, walking across that parking lot with the sun going gold behind her. She wasn't running away from anything at all. She was simply finally flying toward whatever came next. If there's one thing this story leaves behind, let it be this. You hold the pen to your own life. For years, Vera let her father hold that pen instead. Let him write her as a disappointment, a shadow of someone else's expectations, a zero in an equation that was never actually his to solve. But the moment she took that pen back, the moment she stood up in a room full of 200 people and refused to sit back down, she understood completely that she had never been any of those things. She had always been a warrior, setting boundaries with people who hurt us, even people we love, even people who share our blood, is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of radical self-respect. You do not need their permission to become who you already are. You do not need their apology to finally move forward. Your worth was never a gift someone else had the power to give you. It is, and has always been, a fortress you build yourself, one boundary, one decision, one quiet moment of standing your ground at a time.